Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. This time, we're going to be taking a look at something I know a lot of you have been asking about, the impacts of horseback riding,
Hmm.
and particularly thinking about those impacts in, those areas that are supposed to be, conserved. So
Yes.
those conservation areas, protected areas, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, and for this one, we've got a bunch of different sources,
Yeah.
a mix of research articles and management plans
Okay.
that are really going to help us dig into, the hard data,
Yeah.
and then also how that data is actually applied
Right.
in those real world situations.
Yeah, that's great.
So by the time we're done with this deep dive,
Hmm.
hopefully everyone listening will have a better idea of how we can make sure that, our passion for riding doesn't end up actually harming the environment.
Yeah, because I think it's something that a lot of people don't really think about.
Yeah.
They're just so focused on the joy of getting out there and riding their horse that they don't think about those, those impacts that their horse's hooves
Right.
are having on those trails
Absolutely.
and the surrounding environment.
Yeah, and it is a global activity.
It is.
It's not just, our little corner of the world.
Yeah.
There's something like 20 million horseback riders
Wow.
across the developed world.
Hmm.
And the USA, we have a ton of horses here.
Right.
But get this.
Yeah.
France, they have over 60,000 kilometers
Wow.
of equestrian trails,
That's amazing.
which is longer than our entire interstate highway system.
Yeah. That really puts it into perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Just the sheer scale
Yeah.
of, how many people are out there riding and how
Yeah.
many trails there are. And just,
Yeah.
it makes you realize how important it is to manage those impacts,
Right.
especially in those protected areas.
Yeah.
We often think of hiking as having, a pretty light footprint.
Right.
And it generally does. But horses,
Yeah. They're a little heavier.
their impact is magnified,
Yeah.
by quite a bit.
Yeah, it's not just a little stroll in the park.
Right.
It's some
Right.
serious weight hitting the ground with every step.
Yeah. So like a shod horse, a horse wearing horseshoes,
Mm-hmm.
they exert over 20 times the ground pressure
Wow.
of a hiker.
Okay.
So we need to be really careful about where we ride
Yeah.
to make sure we're not compacting the soil too much, especially those delicate soils.
Right.
Because it's like having 20 hikers all stepping on the exact same spot
Yeah.
with every single step the horse takes.
Okay.
And it's not just about the weight either.
Right.
Because unlike hikers, horses often tear up vegetation at the roots as they graze,
Right.
which can lead to wider trails and disruption of, plant life.
It's amazing to think about how those, seemingly small actions, like one horse
Yeah.
stepping on the ground or, taking a bite of some grass,
Mhm.
when you multiply that by millions of riders, really starts to add up.
Yeah. And especially when you think about those really sensitive ecosystems,
Yeah.
like shrublands and Bolster Heath,
Right.
they're really slow to recover from that kind of disturbance.
Exactly. Yeah. I love to ride in those areas, so it's
Okay.
definitely something to think about.
It is. And one study found that just 20 to 30 horse passes
Wow. Okay.
could cause significant changes in those environments.
That's not very many.
No, not at all.
That's like one small group ride
Right, exactly.
going through.
Yeah, and it's not just the trails themselves.
Okay.
Think about those, like, picturesque river crossings
Right.
we see in all those, like, brochures.
Mm-hmm.
Well, those can have a hidden cost, too.
Right. Water.
Yeah,
So essential for the horses and, of course, for the environment.
exactly.
I'm guessing it's not always as pristine as those pictures make it seem.
Right. Yeah, horses can have a negative impact on water quality in a few ways.
Okay.
It's not just about muddy hooves.
Right.
Think about all the sediment that gets churned up as they cross.
Oh.
And that cloudiness, it's called turbidity.
Right.
It's basically like muddying the waters, literally.
Yeah.
It makes it harder for sunlight to reach those aquatic plants and animals
Right.
and disrupts that whole ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the nutrients and pathogens from their manure.
Right.
Remember that Redfern study?
Yeah.
They found increased levels of sediment, E. coli, nitrogen, and phosphorus
Oh, wow.
at horse trail crossings.
Okay.
So those elevated nutrient levels
Yeah.
can lead to algal blooms,
Right.
which deplete oxygen and harm fish populations.
Wow. And of course, E. coli, that's a problem for everyone.
Right, for wildlife and humans
Yeah.
who might be using that water.
It really makes you think twice about, those seemingly natural things like a horse crossing a stream
Yeah,
can have these cascading effects.
exactly. And it really highlights the importance of careful management,
Mm-hmm.
particularly in those riparian zones.
Yeah.
And it kind of brings up another point.
Okay.
How horses can unintentionally become gardeners.
Okay, gardeners. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, well, what goes in must come out, right?
Okay.
So horse manure can be a breeding ground for weed seeds.
Okay.
And horses can pick up and transport those seeds over long distances,
Right.
spreading them as they travel.
So it's not just where they step, but what they eat, too.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
And it's not even just what passes through their system.
Okay.
Those seeds can hitch a ride on their coats
Oh, okay.
or get stuck in the mud on their hooves.
Oh, so they're like a free taxi.
There's like a long-distance taxi service
Yeah.
for invasive species.
For those invasive plants, right?
Yeah, and there's one that comes to mind,
Okay.
the spotted knapweed.
Okay.
That's become a major problem in the American West.
Yeah.
It outcompetes native plants,
Right.
takes over huge areas of land,
Mm-hmm.
and guess what? It can be spread through contaminated hay and horse manure.
Oh,
Yeah, so it's important to think about where your hay is coming from
right.
and make sure it's certified weed-free.
It's a good reminder for all of us, really, to
Think so,
be
too.
super diligent about that,
Yeah.
because that's something we actually have control over
Right.
as writers.
Yeah.
We can make sure we're getting that good clean feed.
Exactly. It's those seemingly small choices that can have a big impact on the bigger picture.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, we've talked a lot about the impacts on land and water.
Mm-hmm.
But let's not forget about those other users
Right.
who are sharing these spaces with us.
Right. It's not just about the horses. You've
Yep.
got hikers and mountain bikers and everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. And, those interactions aren't always harmonious.
Yeah, I can see how that could happen.
Yeah, there's been research that shows those conflicts between hikers and horseback riders are a real issue.
Yeah, I can imagine the manure on the trails, the noise.
And some hikers perceive horses as causing more damage to the environment.
Right.
And there's even differing opinions on whether horses even belong in wilderness areas.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a complex issue.
Yeah, it's not just about protecting the environment.
Yeah.
It's about everybody
Yeah.
being able to share those spaces.
Exactly. It's about fostering a sense of shared stewardship
Yeah.
among all the different user groups.
And that's where those management strategies come in, right?
Exactly.
Because it's not just about posting a sign that says, like, code of conduct.
Right.
There's a whole range of different approaches to
Mhm.
minimize impacts
Yeah.
and hopefully, make a more harmonious
Yeah.
experience for everyone.
Right. One common approach is zoning,
Okay.
where they'll designate specific areas for horseback riding
Right. Okay.
to help concentrate use and keep horses out of particularly sensitive areas.
Yeah.
So it's like creating those horse-friendly zones
Mm-hmm.
within that larger protected area.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's like recognizing that not all areas are created equal
Right.
when it comes to handling those impacts.
Exactly.
And then what about, on the trails themselves?
Yeah, trail management is crucial.
Okay.
Hardening those trails with materials like gravel
Mhm.
can prevent erosion,
Right.
ensure proper drainage.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you even need to reroute sections of a trail
Yeah.
to avoid sensitive areas.
Right.
So it's about being proactive
Yeah.
and designing those trails with both horses and the environment in mind.
It's almost like thinking about it from the horse's perspective.
Yeah.
Where are they likely to graze? Where are those water crossings? How can we minimize those impacts?
Yeah, exactly.
And then another tool is permits and fees.
Yeah.
Right? Which helps regulate use
Yeah.
and generate some funds
Right.
that can support conservation. So
Exactly.
it's kind of like paying it forward to make sure our enjoyment of the trails today
Right.
doesn't ruin it
Exactly.
for those who come after us.
Yeah, and there's a great example of this in Southeast Queensland, Australia.
Yeah.
They have a 20-year monitoring program.
Wow, 20 years.
Yeah,
That's a long time.
it's a long time.
That's some dedication.
It is. It's impressive.
Yeah.
And they've been collecting data
Mhm.
on the impacts of horseback riding.
Okay.
And they're using that information
Mm-hmm.
to inform their management strategies.
So it's not just like collecting data and then it sits on a shelf somewhere.
Right.
They're actually putting it to use,
Yeah, they're using
which
it
is awesome.
to make real changes on
Yeah.
the ground.
That's a great model
It is.
for how to approach this.
Yeah, and it shows how important that long-term data collection is
Mm-hmm.
for effective management.
It really shows
Yeah.
they're committed to figuring this out.
Yeah,
for the long term.
absolutely.
So we've talked about, those physical impacts on the ground, on the water.
Yeah.
We've talked about how different users
Yeah.
interact,
Right.
and how that's not always,
Yeah.
perfect.
Right.
And then we've talked about some management approaches, and it
Mhm.
seems like, finding that balance
Yeah.
between people being able to enjoy nature
Right.
and protecting those places, it's essential.
It is. It's a delicate balance,
Yeah,
but it's one that we need to strive for.
absolutely.
And it requires, that ongoing dialogue,
Yeah.
collaboration, and a willingness to adapt.
Yeah, I think recognizing that,
Yeah.
we're all stakeholders
Sure.
in the health and well-being of those environments.
Absolutely. And that leads us to a really important question.
Okay.
What is the future
Mm-hmm.
of horseback riding in these protected areas?
Yeah.
Because as awareness of these impacts grows,
Yeah.
there's going to be a lot more scrutiny
Yeah, I can see that.
of horseback riding
Mm-hmm.
in these sensitive areas.
So, maybe more restrictions,
Okay.
stricter regulations, maybe. But on the other hand, horseback riding has a long history
It does.
in a lot of these areas.
Yeah.
And, it's part of our culture for a lot of us. It's part of our heritage
Mm-hmm.
and that personal connection to the land.
Absolutely.
So how do we reconcile those two things?
Right.
That desire to preserve those traditions
Yeah.
and the need to protect those ecosystems?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it's something that riders and land managers and researchers all around the world
Yeah.
are grappling with.
So where do we go from here?
Right.
How do we make sure that horseback riding
Yeah.
remains sustainable,
Mhm.
enjoyable for
Really.
generations to come?
Yeah, well, one thing we haven't touched on yet is the type of horseshoes.
Okay.
Because traditional metal shoes, especially those with cleats,
Right.
can actually make those ground pressure issues worse.
Okay.
It's not just about whether a horse is shod or not,
Right.
but the type of shoe as well.
Yeah.
There's been some interesting research into alternative horseshoe materials,
Okay.
like rubber
Right.
or composite shoes,
Interesting.
which might provide a little more cushioning
Yeah.
and reduce that impact.
So those little things, those little details
Yeah.
can really make a difference.
They can, and some people even advocate for barefoot riding.
Yeah. But can horses really handle that, though?
Yeah, you'd be surprised.
Okay.
Horse hooves are really adaptable,
Okay.
and with the right care and conditioning,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of horses can do just fine without shoes,
Really?
even on tougher terrain.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely something to consider.
So maybe barefoot trails could be a solution in certain areas.
Yeah, potentially.
Interesting.
And what about those muddy crossings?
Right. Yeah, they can get pretty bad.
They can turn into like sediment soup,
Yeah.
but there are some simple solutions.
Okay.
Strategically placed rocks or gravel
Right.
can help stabilize those crossings,
Okay.
prevent erosion, create a more durable surface.
Right.
And in those really sensitive areas,
Yeah.
you could even install bridges or elevated walkways
Yeah.
to take those hooves completely out of the equation.
Okay.
So it's about thinking creatively and using those tools
Right.
in a way that works for that particular area.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's the social side of things.
Right.
How do we reduce those conflicts
Yeah.
between hikers and horseback riders?
Well, education's key.
Okay.
Making sure riders are aware of their impact
Mm-hmm.
and how to minimize it.
Right.
So things like teaching them about proper trail etiquette.
Right.
Things like staying single file to minimize trail widening.
Yeah.
And of course, packing out manure.
Yeah, because even though it's natural, nobody wants to see that
Right, exactly.
when they're out for a hike.
It's about being respectful
Yeah.
of other trail users.
Absolutely.
And it's not just about educating riders.
Right.
Hikers need to be informed too
Okay.
about how to safely and respectfully interact with horses on the trail.
So it's about fostering that understanding
Yeah.
on both sides.
Exactly.
Right. And then those zoning strategies we talked about,
Right.
I'm guessing those can help reduce conflicts as well.
Yeah, they can, especially in those high-use areas.
Okay.
Having those designated zones can be a really good solution
Right.
to separate those uses a little bit.
So we've got, those different types of horseshoes.
Mm.
We've got trail design. We've got education. We've got responsible use.
Yeah,
It's a multifaceted challenge.
it is.
But luckily, there's a lot of different approaches.
Yeah, exactly. And it's important to remember
Mm-hmm.
that the most effective management plans are tailored to the specific area.
Okay.
There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
Different environments,
Yeah.
different user groups,
Yeah.
different challenges.
Right.
It really requires a nuanced approach.
So then what are some of the questions that that those land managers should be asking themselves when they're developing these plans?
Well, first and foremost, they need to understand the carrying capacity of the environment,
Okay.
which refers to the maximum number of users.
Okay.
An area can sustain without significant ecological damage.
And that's not just about the number of horses, right?
Right. It's about a lot of different factors.
Uh-huh.
Things like soil type, vegetation cover, the presence of sensitive habitats.
So again, it's recognizing that not all areas are created equal when
Exactly.
it comes to these impacts.
Some areas are just more resilient than others.
Right. Okay.
And once they have a good grasp of that carrying capacity,
Mm-hmm.
then they can start developing strategies
Okay.
to manage use.
Right.
So that might involve limiting the number of permits issued,
Okay.
implementing a reservation system,
Mm-hmm.
or even closing certain trails
Right.
during sensitive times of year.
So it's about finding that balance
Yeah,
between letting people recreate and making sure those resources are protected.
exactly.
Okay.
It can be a delicate balance,
Yeah.
especially in high-demand areas,
Right.
but it's essential to get it right
Absolutely.
for the long-term health of those areas.
So, we've talked about land managers,
Yeah.
but for us as individual riders,
Mm-hmm.
what are some things that we can do to minimize our impact?
Well, we've talked about sourcing weed-free feed,
Right.
packing out manure,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also about choosing trails
Right.
that are appropriate for your horse
Okay.
and your skill level.
So not pushing those limits.
Right,
Or
exactly.
you might end up causing damage.
Yeah, and staying on those designated trails,
Right.
avoiding shortcuts,
Mm-hmm.
which can damage vegetation,
Okay.
and being aware of those potential impacts of
Right.
those water crossings.
Yeah.
So it's really about taking those extra steps
Mm.
to be good stewards of the environment.
Yeah, and those codes of conduct,
Right.
they're there for a reason. They're not just suggestions.
No.
They're really guidelines to make sure everybody can enjoy those trails.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about.
Yeah, we've covered a lot.
When it comes to minimizing, those environmental and social impacts,
Yeah.
but it seems like there's always more to learn
There is.
when it comes to being a responsible equestrian.
Right, and this isn't just about checking boxes or following rules.
Right.
It's about really understanding our place in these ecosystems
Mm-hmm.
and the responsibility that comes with that.
Shifting our mindset from conquest to respect,
Yeah, exactly.
reverence for the natural world.
And that brings us to another layer of this discussion,
Okay.
that inherent tension
Mm-hmm.
between our desire to connect with nature
Right?
through horseback riding
Yeah.
and the potential for our presence to disrupt
Right.
those very ecosystems we cherish.
Yeah. How do we navigate that?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a complex one because horseback riding, especially in those more remote wilderness areas,
Right.
is often seen as a way to connect with nature,
Yeah.
to experience freedom,
Yeah.
adventure.
Right.
There's a certain romanticism
Yeah.
associated with it.
Absolutely.
But we need to recognize that our presence,
Yeah.
even with the best intentions,
Right.
can disrupt those ecosystems.
So how do we reconcile those two things?
Right.
That desire to connect with nature,
Yeah.
but also
you need to protect it.
protect it.
Yeah, it's a profound question.
It is.
And it's one that every rider needs to think about.
Yeah, I think it's about finding that sweet spot
Yeah.
where we can enjoy those horseback riding experiences, but also not compromise
Right.
the integrity of those wild spaces.
Exactly.
So it's about finding that harmony
Yeah.
between our love for horses and our respect for nature.
Yeah. And that often means making conscious choices,
Yep.
like opting for shorter rides,
Right.
choosing trails that have a lower impact, or even choosing alternative forms of recreation
Okay.
that have a lighter footprint.
So recognizing that sometimes less is more
Right.
when it comes to protecting the environment.
It's about quality over quantity
Yeah.
and making sure that every ride is a responsible one.
I think that's a good takeaway.
Yeah.
Quality over quantity.
It's not about how many miles you cover.
Right.
It's about minimizing your impact.
And making sure that those trails are there for,
Yeah.
years to come.
Exactly. And it's about shifting that mindset from entitlement
Right.
to gratitude
Mm-hmm.
and stewardship
And recognizing that the future of horseback riding in these protected areas depends on us making those choices.
It does.
Okay, I think you're right. This goes beyond just those practical solutions.
Yeah.
It's about that deeper philosophical understanding
It is.
of our place in those ecosystems.
Absolutely.
And our responsibility to be mindful, respectful, and proactive.
Right. And it's about recognizing that connection between us, the riders, the hikers, the horses, and the environment itself.
We're all connected.
We're all part of this intricate web of life.
Okay, so we've explored those biophysical impacts. We've talked about those social dynamics and those management approaches.
Yeah.
And I think our listeners are starting to get a good grasp of the complexity.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
But let's get a little more specific.
Okay.
Can you give me an example of how horseback riding is being managed in a real-world setting?
Yeah, let's bring it down to earth a little bit.
Yeah, so let's talk about D'Entrecasteaux National Park in Western Australia.
Okay.
It's a beautiful coastal park with a unique ecosystem that's particularly vulnerable to horseback riding impacts.
All right, so what makes it so vulnerable?
Well, the soils there are very sandy and nutrient poor.
Okay.
And those native plants just haven't evolved to handle the pressure of horses.
So it's a high-stakes situation.
It is.
When it comes to managing how horses are used in that park.
Exactly. And in the past, they had a pretty open access policy for horseback riders, which unfortunately led to some significant damage.
Okay.
But since then, they've implemented a permit system.
Okay.
So limiting access and requiring riders to follow strict guidelines.
So it's a much more controlled approach now.
It is, yeah. It's much more controlled.
All right, and what are some of those guidelines?
Well, they've established designated riding trails and restricted access to sensitive areas.
Okay.
Riders have to stay on those trails, pack out their manure, and use weed-free feed.
Okay.
They've also implemented educational programs to raise awareness among riders about that park's unique ecosystem and the importance of responsible riding practices.
So it's like a multi-pronged approach.
It is.
To really address
those environmental concerns while still letting people enjoy, riding in that park.
Right. It's finding that balance between recreation and conservation.
But then how do they actually enforce those guidelines?
Yeah. Enforcement is always a challenge.
Right, because it's a big area.
It's a large area.
It's not like they can have somebody standing on every trail.
Right. So they've got a few different approaches.
Okay.
They have park rangers who patrol the trails and issue citations to riders who violate the guidelines.
Okay.
They've installed signage throughout the park to remind people of the rules.
Okay.
But maybe most importantly, they've also worked really hard to foster a sense of shared responsibility among those riders.
So it's not just top-down regulations.
Right.
It's about really creating a culture of stewardship within that community.
They've built relationships with the riders.
Educated them about the impacts and empowered them to be part of the solution.
And it sounds like they've been successful.
They have, with
that approach.
There's been a noticeable decrease in trail damage.
Okay.
Since those new management strategies were put in place.
Good.
And there's a growing sense of pride among those riders.
That's awesome.
In being part of those conservation efforts.
Yeah, that's encouraging to hear.
It is.
It shows that it is possible
to
find that balance.
Yeah, it's not always easy.
Right.
But it's definitely possible.
If everyone's willing to work together.
Absolutely.
It's a good reminder that we all have a role to play in protecting those places.
We do.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of things.
We have.
Those impacts on the environment, the social dynamics, management strategies, even a real-world case study. It's pretty complex.
It is a complex issue.
But I think our listeners are starting to get a good handle on all of this. Hopefully.
But, there's one more crucial aspect to this whole conversation that I think we need to address.
Yeah, I think it's an important one.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Whose responsibility is it to make sure horseback riding in these protected areas is actually sustainable?
Right.
Is it all on those land managers?
Right.
To set the rules, enforce the regulations? Or do the riders have an equal obligation to educate themselves, adapt their practices, be true stewards of the environment?
Right. And what about those businesses?
Yeah.
Those outfitters and guides who profit from those experiences?
Yeah. That's a good question.
Do they have a moral obligation
Yeah.
To go above and beyond those minimum requirements.
I think it comes down to shared responsibility.
Okay.
A collective effort.
Yeah, it can't just fall on one group's shoulders.
Exactly.
It's about everybody.
Yeah, communicating, collaborating, and compromising.
Absolutely.
Right.
It's about recognizing that we're all stakeholders.
Yeah.
We all have a role to play.
And it all starts with awareness, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Awareness is key.
Understanding those impacts.
Right.
And our role in either, adding to the problem or being part of the solution.
And that brings us to a really important point. Every decision we make, every action we take has an impact on the natural world.
So even those small things, like the type of horseshoe, the trail you choose to ride on,
it all adds up.
Really adds up over time.
Yeah.
It's about being mindful of those choices and making them with intention.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've established that it's about everyone working together.
Yeah.
But then how do we actually move forward?
Right.
What are some steps we can take to make sure horseback riding can be sustainable and enjoyable?
Yeah, for generations to come.
What's the path towards a more sustainable future?
That's the question we're going to explore in the next part.
All right. Stay tuned, everyone.
Yeah.
We'll be right back after a short break. We've talked about a lot of the practical strategies to make horseback riding more sustainable.
Right.
Choosing the right horseshoes and making sure those trails are managed well. But I feel like this conversation has also brought up some deeper questions about how we relate to horses and the environment.
It's about more than just checking those boxes and following the rules.
Yeah.
It's about examining our values, our motivations, finding a way to reconcile our love of riding with our responsibility to protect those spaces.
It's like we're trying to find that sweet spot where passion and stewardship come together.
Exactly. And it can be tricky to navigate that.
Yeah, because it's like they're pulling in different directions sometimes.
Right. And there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Right.
It's a journey that each rider has to go on for themselves.
So it's about asking those questions.
Yeah.
Examining our own beliefs. And, finding that way to ride.
Yeah.
With both heart and conscience.
Well said.
And I think you're right. Our connection to horses and nature is personal.
It is.
And, those experiences we have shape who we are.
They do. They shape our values and our actions.
And hopefully those values are what lead us to those better choices.
Yeah, it's not just about following the rules.
Right.
It's about cultivating that mindset of respect and responsibility and bringing that into everything we do.
It's like that shift from entitlement to gratitude.
Yes, exactly.
Recognizing that, we're so lucky to be able to share those trails with those amazing animals and those landscapes.
Absolutely. And that privilege comes with responsibility.
Yeah.
To protect those places.
I think that's a good way to put it.
It's about moving beyond that conquer and control mentality that we've had with nature for so long.
Yeah.
And embracing something that's more humble and harmonious.
It's about recognizing, we're not separate.
Right.
We are part of that web of life.
We're all interconnected.
And all our actions, no matter how small, they have consequences for that whole web.
Every hoofbeat matters.
Yeah.
Every choice we make on the trail sends ripples through that ecosystem.
Wow. Yeah.
And those ripples can either help it or hurt it.
It's a powerful thought.
It is. It makes you realize that even the smallest actions have meaning.
It's about being present and mindful in those moments when we're out there riding.
And recognizing that sustainability.
Yeah.
It's not a destination.
It's a journey.
It's a process.
It's an ongoing process of learning and adapting.
Yeah.
And always trying to do better.
And being willing to, challenge our own assumptions.
Absolutely.
And embrace new ways of doing things.
And being open to different perspectives.
Yeah, because what works for one person might not work for another.
Exactly.
Or what works in one place might not work somewhere else.
And that's why those conversations are so important. Yeah. Those open and honest conversations within the equestrian community.
Right. So sharing those experiences.
Yeah.
Sharing those challenges. And sharing those solutions.
Learning from each other.
Yeah.
Supporting each other.
Absolutely.
On that journey towards sustainability.
Creating that culture of shared learning, collective responsibility.
And celebrating those successes because those successes inspire us to keep going.
Yeah, it's contagious.
It is. those ripples spreading outwards.
Exactly.
Creating a wave of sustainability.
It's a beautiful image.
Yeah, it is.
And it's a powerful reminder that we're all connected.
We are.
And that our actions can create real change.
Yeah, it starts with each of us.
It does.
That commitment to being responsible.
To being good stewards of the environment.
To being a voice for those places.
Absolutely.
That can't speak for themselves.
It starts with those choices we make every time we saddle up.
And you know those choices about where we ride.
Yeah.
How we ride. What kind of impact we have.
Right. It all matters.
It does.
And it goes beyond just the ride itself.
Yeah.
It's the conversations we have.
Right.
The actions we take. The legacy we leave behind.
It's about making sure that, you know, future generations can also experience the joy of horseback riding. And that, you know, it's in those healthy, thriving ecosystems. It's about protecting the trails, but it's also about protecting the memories, the experiences.
The connection between horses and humans.
That connection is so special.
It is.
And, you know, it's something that has been with us, you know, for a long time.
For centuries.
It's a vision worth striving for.
It is.
A legacy worth leaving behind.
And I believe we can achieve it.
Yeah.
Together.
Well, on that note of hope and inspiration, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the world of horseback riding and sustainability.
It's been quite a journey. Exploring those challenges, those solutions, those questions about our role as equestrians in this world.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been my pleasure.
And to all our listeners, thank you for being here with us.
We appreciate you tuning in.
We hope you learned some things.
Yeah.
Maybe you're feeling inspired to make some changes. Absolutely.
In your own riding.
Yeah.
And remember, every ride is a chance to make a difference.
It is.
Happy trails, everyone.